to episode 8 of the Doctor Who Spin the Wheel podcast.
How on earth did you know that? Episode
because
8.
I read the group chats, Will.
I'm dumb.
I am your host, Andrew. Andy. We're going with Andy for this one because we have a guest also called Andrew who we'll get to in a moment. But yes, I'm your host, Andy. Joining me is our other host, Will.
Hello, hello. How are you, Andy?
Fine. I hate technology.
Yeah, yes. The amount of technical
of
issues we've had this morning. Jesus Christ. Well, this afternoon. We're starting at 2 o'clock. We were meant to start at 1. This is a
We were
disaster.
meant to start at 1, yeah. We're about an hour late.
Yeah.
Oh well, it's fine. And joining us this week is our guest, Andrew Hayden!
Woo.
Woo!
Alright, Andrew?
Yeah. Hi.
No, that's an intro.
You sound enthused. You sound thrilled.
Sorry, I'm just really tired today.
Yeah, so am I, to be
It's
fair.
alright.
I've had to drink. I was going to say I've had to drink my
Would it make you feel more comfortable
energy
if I
drink
did
water.
Pascal's accent all podcast? Would that make you feel more at home?
Yeah, if you couldn't tell, he's from Liverpool, so the accent is strong with this one. But then again,
I really like the Liverpudlian accent.
So do I.
I know my partner hates it, but I like it. But I had to learn how to do it for when we did Blood Brothers at my A level. So
yeah.
I've kind of remembered how to do it from there.
For some background, Andrew Hayden has been a long-term kind of pal on Twitter. I've known him for absolutely forever, it seems. So I thought, why not invite him onto the podcast? And,
Yeah, why has he not been on yet? I thought he would have been.
Yeah, I don't know. When I conceived this kind of series, I was like, we need to get new guests on. So I thought, oh, Andrew hasn't been on. Let's get him on. And now he is.
I just find it funny that I started out as just a guest, and now lo and behold, here I am.
Oh dear. Yeah.
You asked, well, you and Mike. Anyway, for today's episode of Spin the Wheel, we have watched if you didn't see it at the end of the last episode, we watched the Sarah Jane adventure story, Day of the Clown, which I believe makes this the first episode we've done on a spin-off.
You see, this is so stupid. We were meant to do 2 episodes before this, actually. I think we're originally going to do Class, like an episode of Class, but then Andrew didn't have the DVD. Did you, Andy?
No.
And then, so we scrapped that and we respun the wheel, and I think it landed on Fenric. And then last week's episode, or no, the week before, was The Mind Rubber, and we were actually meant to do Countryside. So we were meant to have all 3 spin-offs done by this point, but apparently not. This will be the first, and I am actually contemplating doing the 2 reviews of the Class episode and also the Torchwood episode as like a midweek thing, so something to ponder on.
I mean, I'd be up for... Which Class episode was it?
Co-owner of a Lonely Heart.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Oh, yeah, so...
Which I watched the other day, which is fantastic.
Fun fact, right, so Will, bless his heart, being the good mate he is, about a month ago, actually sent me the Class box set as just a random gift. Gift. I didn't know it was a thing he was doing. So he sent me that. Obviously, it was a really nice gesture, but obviously the ulterior motive being it's so we can do it for reviews. And then about 2 weeks after I got that, Class went back up on iPlayer.
Yeah. Andrew, have you got any history with Sarah Jane Adventures? Did you watch it as a kid growing up, or is it something you revisited later?
Well, I started watching Sarah Jane Adventures. The first episode I ever watched was Warriors of Kurdlak.
Great episode.
So I started... it's actually an episode... For me, it's probably one of the weakest episodes of Sarah Jane Adventures, in my opinion. I've enjoyed it more as I've gotten older, because I enjoy the laser tag kind of thing. Like I've never really played it, but it does seem quite interesting.
Yeah.
And since that episode, I've watched it throughout my life. But for years, I didn't have the box set. I just watched it. I remember I think it was about 4 years ago when they did. I think they did like a back-to-back 3 episodes of Sarah Jane Adventures. And that was the last time I watched it until I got the box set last December.
Nice.
So since then, I've done like 2 marathons of it.
You see, that's what I'm going to be doing.
It's a great show.
Yeah.
It's a really great show, legitimately.
We should probably get to the review of today's episode.
Yeah, sorry, we should probably get to the actual review. Yeah, we're reviewing Day of the Clown from Series 2, which is the first appearance of Rani as well. So I guess we'll start where we normally start in these, which is the TARDIS team, but we don't have a TARDIS team in this, so we'll just go with, the crew, the Bannerman Road team. What are your thoughts on them?
Andrew, do you want to take this?
Yeah. Firstly, I think they were all good in the scenes that they were in. However, one of the criticisms I have with it is that I feel like Luke didn't get much to do in the story.
Yeah, agreed.
And Sarah Jane, she didn't get much to do in the first half. She got more to do in the second half, but I feel like she was kind of in the background for the first half, and it was just Clyde and Rani.
The problem I have with Luke is that the actor's just a bit naff, because I did write a note that's a little bit later on, and I haven't put these in like category, which I should have done because we're talking about categories, but I did put it chronologically. But one of my criticisms was that he was like running after the clown with Clyde across the streets, and he looks so confused throughout. Like, the clown is clearly in shot, but his reaction's like so void of any emotions. Like, oh, I can see you. It's like, oh, it's right in front of me, but I can't see you. It's just bad acting. I hate the actor.
I think that's part of the plot though, because because Odd Bob gave certain people tickets, and only the people who
that's the thing. I don't think Luke can see him. Only Clyde can,
because he didn't get a ticket.
But I don't know. But ironically for me, in the scenes that he was in both parts, I thought wow, but not for him, but for Elizabeth Sladen. Her line about one of the best things about life is that it's always surprising us in part 1 is a great little moment, and then in part 2, when they're both talking about her childhood fear, which is a really subdued timeout moment in an otherwise hectic non-stop second part, and that kind of feeds into a phrase I have for Elizabeth Sladen. I think she was gem, and she is massively missed. Of course, she's an excellent talent, and I think she was pretty good in both parts, even including part 1.
I don't think Elizabeth Sladen ever put in a bad performance, really. Elizabeth Sladen was always, like, amazing.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of a bad performance. But I do kind of agree she was underutilized in part 1. I think it was more to introduce Rani.
Yeah, I don't mind that she wasn't as active in part 1, because, again, like you just said, they had to introduce Rani, and at the same time, I feel like it actually helps the episode that she's not as involved in the first part, because it really helps set up the threat and the creepiness of Odd Bob.
Yeah.
Who, I think at least me and you, Will, agreed that part 1 is better than part 2.
100%.
I think in part 1, in part 2 as well, but I think especially in part 1, I think Odd Bob is genuinely actually quite creepy.
This is the point I was going to make as well. I feel like he is better in part 1 because I feel like in part 1 he's shown less, and when he is shown, it's more mysteriously. Like when Rani looks out the window and she just sees him looking at her.
Yeah, there are a lot of creepy moments with him in the first part.
But I feel like in part 2 I don't want to say he becomes more normal, but he's talking a lot more, and it comes off a bit less creepy.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and it's like a horror trope. I've mentioned this in a previous episode, actually. Less is more, and I think it was George from our Robot Sherwood review who just said that's how horror works. It's like, once you get to know more about it, then it just becomes less intense, and I completely agree, because the scenes where he's being drip-fed into the scenes was cool, but it's so frustrating, and this is one of my negatives in part 1, one of my only negatives I have. It's so frustrating that Rani doesn't bring it up, ever. Like, for example, I felt left to my own devices to interpret that she was keeping it a secret. Without that interpretation, it almost felt like there was little impact on her from the experiences, and there was no sort of trauma. Is that just me? Because I felt like when the principal was introduced, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but when they're all together on the Bannerman Road and it's revealed that the principal is her father, they're kind of together and they're talking about Clyde seeing a clown. But then I thought that was such a perfect opportunity for Rani to mention it, but then she just never does. And then it's not even implied that she's keeping it a secret. It's just never brought up. Is that just me? It's gone very quiet.
I think it's implied that she's keeping it a secret just because she doesn't want to be, like, seen as mad.
Yeah, I think she makes that point to Luke, doesn't she? When Luke, Clyde, and Rani are all walking down the road, and she says, she basically says, I can't tell anyone, and Luke's like, why? And she goes,
do you want them to lock me up? Yeah.
And he goes, why would they do that? And she goes, "What planet is he from?"
Yeah, so that is mentioned, Will.
Okay, well, I just felt it like he didn't do enough. Like, he had one scene, but then it was never brought up again. It was no real emotional depth to that. But if we're going on to the main cast, like Daniel Anthony, who plays Clyde, delivers his lines so over the top, and that's his personality, and I love it. I love how he bursts into that nice scene with Slade and Knight at the start, like when they're reminiscing about Maria, which I also thought was a nice little moment. And when he was also walking through the school to his locker, projected his lines, I just love the delivery of his lines, and I think he's a great actor.
I like Tommy Knight as an actor as well, who plays Luke. Like,
Really?
I think for the most part, when I remember his performances, he's really good.
I think with Luke, he does seem very like sorry, I don't know if this is the word, but very unconfident. But I think that's kind of the point,
That's
isn't it?
kind of the character, yeah, because the whole point is that he's not a real... Well, he is, but he's like, the circumstances in which he was made...
He was an augmented human.
Yeah, exactly.
But even then, I just think it's an acting standpoint, because I think he's in Casualty, or he's in one of those kind of shows, hospital drama, and I've only seen little bits of that, but whenever I see him in those kind of shows, I just think he's so dry, he's not actually putting any heart into it, and he's exactly the same.
All I'll say is, if you think he's a bad actor, watch The Nightmare Man.
I've seen him in Waterloo Road when he played. I think it was. I can't remember where it's.
Oh yeah, he was in Waterloo Road, wasn't he?
He played the adopted son of Daniel Shaw, but I think he was really good in that.
Andrew, have you seen that?
I'm gonna look it up for you now, because I know for a fact he was in it. I remember, but I can't remember who he played.
I just want to know what hospital drama he was in, so I can get my point across. Yeah, he was in Casualty in 2007, but it says he was only in one episode, so maybe it was just that. Oh no, he came back in Casualty. He was in 2 episodes.
He played Kevin Chalk in Waterloo Road.
Okay. Yeah. 55 episodes of that, jeez. But yeah, okay, I'll take your word for it. But yeah, I wasn't a fan of Tommy Knight in this, to be honest. I was by far more accustomed to Clyde, and again, Ronnie. I think Ronnie was better in part 2. I think she was given a bit more to do in part 2, and I think she was a bit more confident acting wise in part 2, so I'm actually intrigued to know if part 2 was filmed like far away from part 1, because part 1 I could tell like that was her introduction. She probably filmed these scenes first, and I think contrary to Matt Smith in Time of Angels, where he was just like explosive from the off, I don't think Ronnie was particularly in part 1. Like I was just focused more on Clyde. Like Clyde was more of the explosive actor in those scenes. Even with Tommy Knight, I don't think he was particularly good, but Clyde carried those scenes for me.
Yeah, I think Clyde was probably the best. I thought the scenes, like for example when I think his name was Finney went missing.
Yes.
And he was looking around for him, and the moment he saw Odd Bob in the mirror.
Yes,
those kinds of scenes.
I really like how they utilised the scene of the school to portray Odd Bob abducting Clyde's friend. It makes what feels like a safe location feel like it's daunting and playing tricks on you. And like you just said, exploring for his friend was a great sequence, but the direction when Odd Bob is seen in the mirror, it falls a bit flat for me, to the point that the editor couldn't even make it good. It's fine though, it works. But I love the whole concept of using the school to like abduct the children.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds weird.
There's a part as well when I think they see him at the end of a corridor, and I think it's just Clyde and Luke sort of run after him, and he like sort of like pulls that sort of clown blanket thing out of nowhere, and then like flaps it, and then like just disappears. I think that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it was just, and that was just Clyde, because I think it was just after he'd come out the bathroom, or it was just after he'd come out of the room that Finney went in.
Yeah,
and he shelled his hay and ran down the corridor.
I made a note that in terms of acting, I think the standouts were without a doubt Elizabeth Sladen and actually Bradley Walsh.
Oh, Bradley Walsh was fantastic.
Bradley Walsh was like really good as the villain in this, like genuinely.
It's weird because people keep on saying, I remember when he was cast as Graham, people were saying, he's just a comedian, he can't act, and you're like, if you think he can't act,
watch
Day of the Clown.
And I think this is his probably best performance.
He was good in Law and Order as well. I know that's not related to the Who universe, but he was good in Law and Order.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but I really want to, and that's why I did make the note. Like, it's his best performance in the Whoniverse out of what I've seen of him. And why I say that is because, as I explained to you, Andy, the other day, I think in Doctor Who, he's just playing Bradley Walsh, but with a different backstory. Of course, in this, he's just putting in a whole different portrayal, and he's portraying a character as opposed to just himself.
In this, he is like absolutely the embodiment of like just a scenery chewing villain. Like you can tell he's just having fun playing the role. Yeah, and it's great to watch.
It's like in the pre-title sequence, he goes "Whee!" as it transitions into the title sequence, and I love that. Like, he's meant to be this really intimidating villain, but again, like clowns are meant to be scary but funny as well. And I think he just...
Well, that's it. They're not meant to be scary. It's that people find them scary. I think they're creepy. I don't like them.
He was meant to be treated as scary because he was... because I know he was meant to be very much like, Pennywise? Mm-hmm. It was meant to be like that.
This whole thing is... You can very clearly tell this is like it. I'll just run down some of the notes that I have for the main cast before we move on, because we're kind of going into the villain now, so I'll just get these out of the way. I put... Liz/Sarah just has amazing chemistry with everyone she's on screen with. I put, I personally really like Rani as a character. Yeah. I remember when Maria left, I didn't know how they'd replace her because, like, I thought Yasmin Page was really good as Maria, and then Rani came along and I was like, oh, what's up?
No, as in, I disagree. I think Maria was just a bit over the top, shall we? It was because of the high-pitched voice. It was like... And I just thought, oh, for God's sake. Yeah. But then Rani came in and she was a bit less stereotypical.
I kind of agree. I think it depends what episode you watch, because when I think of Maria, I mainly think of her performance in Whatever Happened to Sarah Jane, and I think she's brilliant in that because she kind of has to carry it.
Yeah. From memory, I agree with that.
It depends which episode you think of. I do agree to some extent.
Just to give my thoughts on Maria and Rani. For some reason, I've never really connected to Maria. I can't explain what it is, but I've just never really found her that engaging on telly, especially if you compare her to Rani.
But from a statistical point of view, like, the fact that she had one series and Rani had 4 is clear as day why, because I think Rani's the far superior character.
Oh, Rani is a lot better. Rani is a lot better.
I think it's because Anjali Mahindra is older as well, because she's like she is only.
She was about 18, yeah.
But no, I love Rani as a character. I think she's great. Definitely a good replacement for Maria. And I think especially like during like her second season onwards, I think she just gels really well.
Yeah.
I remember, I know this is going to sound awful, but I remember after like a few episodes with Rani, I didn't really miss Maria. Not that I didn't like Maria, I did, but like, I don't know, just Rani fits in really well. I think the main thing I missed about Maria was just that her dad was hot, to be honest.
I liked Alan, he was good as well.
Alan was really a great character.
I will say, we'll get into this more in a bit, but I at least personally really like Rani's mum a lot, but we'll get into that when we get to side characters.
I like Gita as well.
If you said you liked his dad, I would kill you.
Oh yeah, this relates to main characters, so I'll just put this in now. One of my criticisms was that some of the dialogue is kind of cringy. Mostly some of the stuff that Clyde says. But I also put, but since this show is geared more towards kids, I can let it slide a bit more. I think I mentioned this to you, Will. I personally actually thought this was really funny. And I don't think kids would get it either. But it was the part where when Sarah mentions that she has a fear of clowns, and Luke mentions that coulrophobia is a phobia of clowns. And Clyde says, what encyclopedia did you find that in? And Luke just says, heat. I thought that was really quite funny. That was a decent joke.
Yeah.
It is so in character for Luke, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely. We've already mentioned that Elizabeth's performance is great, but in particular, I just really like how she sells the performance of Sarah being, like, terrified of clowns. Yeah. Like, I think she really sells that, like, amazingly well. I think that's it for my notes on main cast. I don't know if you guys had any more.
Most of my points have kind of been covered throughout. But one thing I was going to say is I like how it carries on from Maria's departure, and you get to see how Luke is coping with that because he's not used to that kind of stuff, is he?
Yes.
Clyde is because of Paul leaving him and Carla, so he kind of gets over it quickly. Whereas Luke's not used to it, so he's kind of pushing Rani away.
Yeah, I really like the quick scene, like when they're going up the stairs to the attic before that scene that Andrew was on about, and he kind of just stops to look at the picture of them together, and then he just kind of like dismisses it and then goes up in dismay, and I just think that was a really nice little moment.
One reason I like that picture as well is because it's from an episode that we've seen as well, so like we know where that happened. I just think that's quite a nice
Which
little
episode
touch.
is it?
It's from Whatever Happened to Sarah Jane.
Oh, okay.
That's Sarah Jane. It's after Sarah Jane goes missing, and they actually say, I think in the picture, I think the picture changes in that episode, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the picture's taken at the start. It's when they're all at the skate park together, and then when Sarah Jane disappears, she gets replaced in the photo with Andrea.
Gotcha.
It's just nice that we sort of can see that picture and go, oh, we were there when that happened.
Yeah.
Unlike in Doctor Who, sometimes when they'll refer to an event that happened off screen that we never saw.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
Can I talk about my hatred for the principal now, please?
Do you want to do sidecast and then properly go into villain?
Yeah, sidecast.
Sure.
Oh god, I absolutely hate how he was characterized when he was introduced to the audience by, in the eyes of the children in the classroom. He's the typical strict boss who comes in and puts everyone down to stump his authority. It's such a cliche. That being said, I do like the line later in the episode where Gita asks Ronnie if he was like a sailor, like he always is when he's going into new jobs. I would have hated if they hadn't had that little bit where it established that he always does that and it's like a character trait. It felt like he could have been more lenient considering the disappearing children in the context of the story. And even when he mentioned it, he didn't have the care and essence about him. The stubbornness of the character could have been established over the course of the series, so it didn't have to be bonked over our heads to get the message across. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest negative in this particular episode for me, is the principal's characterization.
Yeah, one thing I didn't actually think of this until you've just mentioned it, but somewhat anyway. But like the fact that kids have gone missing, you'd think he'd call the police or get someone to do something about it. Did he?
You don't see it on screen, but it is mentioned. He mentions it to Gita.
Yeah, but even then, the whole characterization on screen, like that, he calls the police after his interaction with Clyde. It wasn't implied that he was going to call the police. It was only found out that the police had been called after the scene, and I was like, he actually called the police after that scene. Why couldn't we see it, or why couldn't it be implied? Why couldn't he have that like tonal shift of like, oh, I didn't believe you two. Oh, okay, I may take this seriously now. It's just a thrown away bit of dialogue, and it's a bit of a waste, in my opinion, anyway.
I think as well. I think when he's talking to Clyde in his office, he seemed like he just wasn't bothered.
Yeah, exactly.
He was just more focusing on Clyde potentially lying rather than the fact the students have gone missing.
Yeah, and they reintroduced that kind of plot thread in part 2 after everything happened, and I guess you have to forgive it because it's a kid show and all, but after all the resolution that had taken place, we have the principal come in and says, oh, it was a stupid walkout. Oh, and I thought, was it?
You've literally just seen everyone walk out of the school with balloons in hand.
Exactly. But even then, I've got a criticism about that scene in part 2. It was like he looks out the window, and that they cut to that straight after a scene where all the kids are picking up the balloons that are coming out of the sky. So, narratively speaking, the principal should have seen the children picking up the balloons, not walking away. And then in the next scene that he's in, he's running through the corridor and he says, where are all the children? Implying the children are all gone. And then the third scene where they're in is all the teachers out in the playground with no children. And it's like, they've done that sequence to get a point across that the children had already left. But I just thought, you just seen the children out of your window. What's going on? So I think the structure sequencing of the edit was a bit over the place there. So I think that could have been a bit better.
One thing I will say as well, it's when he's sitting down on the desk, he's facing away from the window. Why does he look out the window?
I knew that was going to get brought up.
Because there's no sound made to indicate that something's going on. So what?
I understand, but then my pushback to that is, right, you're in your room now, right? And if about 50 people was just walking down your street, even if they're not even speaking, you would still hear their footsteps subconsciously, just because there are so many of them, and just because it's subtle, but you would notice.
But people are walking and running around the playground anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change.
If they're not, well, clearly they were meant to be in classes though at this point, so
No,
maybe that's why.
Because they were hypnotized as it was break time. They were all playing around, and then the balloons came out of nowhere. So it wasn't meant to be class. It was meant to
Oh,
be.
okay, then fair.
Surely, if they were in the playground, surely if they were meant to be in class, they'd be in class. But they weren't. When the scene started, they were in the playground.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
that's
was a
fair.
stupid
I
little bit.
forgot. I forgot they got the balloons out of the sky.
Yeah. But
I will
yeah.
say I don't necessarily agree with everything that you guys are saying.
Oof.
I agree with some of it, but
Yeah.
like, how do I word it? I actually quite like there's a bit of a dichotomy to his character, that he's kind of a dick when he's at work, but then at home he's actually quite nice. Like, even to Clyde, he's not that rude to him when they're outside of the school. And he doesn't, like, take umbrage with the fact that... Well, I guess he does, because he does mention to Rani that she should stay away from Clyde, but at the same time, like, by the end, when they're actually hanging out together, he just kind of accepts it and moves on.
Yeah.
So, like,
I suppose.
I don't hate him. I don't like think he's a great character by any means, but I don't hate him like you seem to.
Yeah. In contrast, though, I really love Ronnie's mum.
I was going to say as well, I actually do think he cares in his own kind of way. Like, obviously, we already know he does call the police. And I think he only seems to not believe Clyde about the clown. He doesn't ever seem to really... He never questions that Finney's disappeared. He, like, well, I guess... He kind of does, because he says, what if he's just, like, gone home and not stayed?
Yeah.
So he questions it, but he never outright calls Clyde a liar for saying he's disappeared. The only thing he disagrees with is the whole that a clown took him, which obviously, whilst we know that was the case, thinking it from his perspective, how would a clown have broken into the school and stolen a kid? So, like, I personally don't really have a problem with that, because...
But surely that would give you bad signals. So, like, children are being abducted or disappearing and whatever, and then you have a sighting of a weird man, a weirdly dressed man, lurking around a school with a kid, and then that would strike you odd, no? Like...
Oh, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But the fact that I'm sure multiple people have mentioned that they've seen clowns, haven't they? Or is it just Clyde?
I think they mentioned it after.
Because Finney never mentioned
Jane.
that he'd seen him. Finney never mentioned he'd seen him, but obviously there's that scene where Rani's looking through the school books.
Yeah.
And he's drawn all over them. Which, by the way, I think is the creepiest scene, because those drawings are quite creepy in themselves. And then that's the part where, like, Rani... I think that's when Rani looks out the window, and then...
And she sees Bob out the window.
And then afterwards he appears in the kitchen behind her.
I love that music in that scene as well. I love how dark it
agreed.
is.
The music is superb throughout this whole episode. I think it's Sam Watts. I think he's the permanent composer for the show. And I really liked the musical score in the first pre-title sequence. When it was really tense, and coupled with the sound effects when the clowns quickly zip past the frame, it was fantastic. And there was a slight ticking essence in it, like there was a slight ticking in the musical score, which I noticed fed into the disorientation vibe they went with that whole sequence, which was evident.
About the music as well, I just want to quickly mention one of my favourite parts, musically wise, was when the kids are being, like, taken in part 2, because they add sort of pipes.
Yes.
Because of the Pied Piper. So they actually kind of bring in that element of the music, which I think works and sells the idea that, you know, this is what the Pied Piper is now. Which, by the way, I know we'll talk about it more when we discuss, like, Oddbob in more detail, but in general, I just really like the fact that this is another version of the universe tackling, like, folklore.
Yeah.
I always enjoy it when they do that.
And I like how the scene with Rani in the room with Mr. Smith, and then Mr. Smith says, well, it's a historical fact that children did go missing. I was like, oh, if this is true, which I'm sure it probably is, then that's a fantastic, like, use of that, and it's actually much more sinister because it's given an explanation to a historical event.
Yeah. It's like when it's one of the reasons, and I won't talk about this episode much because the writer's problematic, but it's another one of the reasons why I appreciate what the Unicorn and the Wasp does, because it's like Agatha Christie really did disappear for 10 days, like, out of nowhere, and then reappeared. That genuinely did happen. So it's kind of cool that the show tried to do its own explanation for why that happened, and I like that that's what's happening again here.
Yeah.
I like the kind of the relationship between Clyde, Haresh, and Rani, because you got Clyde's friends with Rani, but Haresh loves Rani because he's her dad, but Haresh doesn't like Clyde. So it's kind of a
and it's worked into other episodes as well. Like they're just bantering between the two because I'll bring up death to the doctor. I like it's a really sad moment, but it's when Clyde's getting into the car and he gets a bit of static, and then Haresh makes a little bit of a jab at him, and I think that's perfectly timed comedy. And I think even though yes,
doesn't pay attention in school.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the whole dynamic. I completely agree with you. I think it's a fantastic little trio.
I think there's another good moment about it in, I think it's Mark of the Berserker, which I think is in this series.
Great episode.
But it's when like Clyde's dad starts like making Haresh do like all that exercise or something, and initially Clyde finds it funny, but then like after a while it starts to get a bit more sinister when he realizes that it is not stopping.
Yeah.
I like that moment when, I don't know, it's fun how they play with sort of Clyde and Haresh's dynamic throughout the show.
But yes, Gita, that door you deck prick.
I fucking love Gita. I think when we did Wedding of Sarah Jane, I think Mike said he couldn't stand her. I love her.
Mike said that?
She's great. I think she's great.
Yeah. Oh, she was the best thing. Well, she's
such
the best
good comic
character.
relief. She's such good comic relief.
Yeah, there were a couple memorable lines in there for me. It was like, first of all, it was the "Do you save the world every day, or is it just on Mondays?" Like that's not an unrealistic line. Like that is very real. Yet it strikes us cool because she does save the world every day, and of course she didn't want them to know. So that was a great line. Very simple yet very effective, and also the exchange that I messaged you to you, Andy. And this was the exchange. He was like, "I'm very pleased to meet you, Sarah." And then Sarah Jane says, "Jane." And then she looks up at her and she says, "Lovely." I love that. It's such perfectly delivered.
I freaking adore Gita. I just think she's really funny and entertaining.
Yeah.
I love how she does keep forgetting Sarah Jane's got Jane at the end of Sarah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than. I think that's kind of the opposite of what what was Maria's mum called?
Chrissy,
thank you. I knew it began with a C. It's kind of the opposite of what she always called her, where she always got the Jane but forgot the first bit. So it was always like Mary Jane, or I think at one point she called her Calamity Jane or something.
Yeah. Oh, the whole sequence. Their chemistry popped, I think, Elizabeth and whoever played her. What's the actress's name who plays her?
I can't remember her name. She's like, I think it's Julie or something.
You mean
you think Chrissy or Gita?
Rani's mum, Gita, yeah.
Oh, Rani's mum.
Mina Anwar, I think.
I think that's it.
Fantastic actress.
Fun fact as well, she also played in Smile as well.
Was she?
Yeah, she was in Smile.
What character
She played one of the people that got killed in the cold.
One of the, yeah.
Oh, of course, yes. Yes, I when I watched Smile, I've always recognised that character, but my mind just went blank. Yes, I love her. She's
you know
a
what?
great character.
This is probably going to be a very unpopular opinion. Smile, underrated episode.
I love Smile. I
think it's pretty good.
It's probably I think it's the weakest of Series 10, but I think it's still really good.
I think it's middle third.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Put it this way, considering it was written by the same person who did In the Forest of the Night, it could have been a lot worse.
It's an improvement on In the Forest of the Night, I'll give you that.
But to be fair, that's not really saying much.
Exactly. If you compare it to the Series 10 finale or Knock Knock or Thin Ice, it just doesn't hold up in my opinion. But yeah, it's decent. It'd be like a 5 out of 10 for me.
That's like saying, well, Empress of Mars is an improvement over Sleep No More. Yeah, but that's
not
really
saying much. Even then, I don't actually mind Sleep No More. I think it's underrated. It's not good.
Me and you have agreed that Empress of Mars is actually pretty great.
Empress of Mars is great.
Definitely one of Gats's better stories.
Yeah, I think it's up there with The Unquiet Dead and Cold War for
Gatus
best gate stories.
Please, in the description of this episode, put like we reviewed the Sarah Jane Adventure story, Day of the Clown, and for some reason the Idiot's Lantern.
Yeah, that's besides the point, and you've all gone quiet on me again, so I'll just move us on.
Did you finish?
Yeah,
villains. Should we talk about the villain?
Yeah, why not? I think
if you don't want to, we can leave it.
Yeah, and that wraps up today's episode. No,
I was.
yeah, go for it, Andrew.
3 things I was gonna say. Firstly, I was going to say about Oddbob, I feel like got the perfect amount of development.
Yes.
'Cause I feel like he wasn't too overdeveloped. Because I feel like if he got too overdeveloped, he might have lost all of his threat.
Yes. I mentioned this in my part 2 villain notes, and it's similar to bounce off of you. I do like the moment where Sarah Jane is trying to convince the villain to stop being villainous. Of course, a trope, and the writer had included that to get across that it's stupid by having the Pied Piper say, "Can you imagine a bogeyman that brings children back from Never Neverland? Who would be scared of me then?" That's a fab line, and it just makes sure that this villain isn't easily defeated. Ironically, because the very next note is absolutely dreadful in that regard. But my point is, it's developed well enough, and I think it's not you can't fault the character. You can fault the resolution and the whole wrap up to the episode of part 2. But that being said, I think the character itself, the backstory, like you said, perfectly developed.
Actually,
sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, talking about what you said about the resolution, I actually kind of like the resolution. I think the fact that he wants people to fear him, and I feel like battling that with laughter,
but
I think
it cuts a waste to the Spellman's robots with canned laughter. That makes no sense. And how does a meteor slice trap the Spellman? I would love an explanation from the writer.
Right.
Why he was going with it. It was so bad for me.
So I have one main issue with the resolution, which is just that whilst I agree with what Andrew said, where I like the idea that because this is an entity that feeds on fear, they use laughter, because it's kind of the opposite. What I will say is what doesn't make sense is it's just Clyde, Ronnie, and Sarah Jane there, but apparently them laughing is enough to stop him.
Yeah, I would have liked it to be like, and to be like, him to be like, what's the word? Like get overcrowded with laughter. People, like loads of people doing it, so he kind of gets a bit.
Because with it just being the three of them, that's where it falls flat for me. Because it's like, really?
But that's what
that's
what the canned laughter is for, though, is to imply that more people are laughing, and as the canned laughter is playing, it cut away to the robots, implying the robots are laughing.
Yeah, but I don't know why they would be.
But exactly, I don't think it's implying it, but it's not meant to be implying it. So I interpreted the implication, but it's actually not. It's just because they didn't have the budget to get some more people in, to have some cutaways to actual people laughing, like across the world or something like that, like Doctor Who may have done. But yeah, it's just because it's a low budget, I guess. And
I will say that those robots are actually pretty creepy.
The robots are really cool, and I really like the blue special effects they added when the robots malfunctioned after the Sonic's laser was like pointed at them. I think the special effects team did a decent job there.
I will say as well about the point that you made about like people all over the world laughing. I don't know how that would have worked, because the fact that it was Clyde in the actual museum making the jokes, so I don't know how people all over the world would be laughing, because they wouldn't be able to hear him.
But yeah, that's why the resolution kind of falls flat for me. I like the concept, but the execution isn't the best. Although I am glad that at least Ronnie calls Clyde out on the fact that these jokes that he tells are absolutely shit.
The jokes are terrible. I found about 2 of them actually funny, and I was like, oh, I might use that, but I'm not going to use it, obviously. But all the other ones are like so dreadful. I think Ronnie's one was like, where did you find your one-legged dog? Where you left him, or something like that. And I just thought, what the hell?
There is a bit of an overused joke that I have heard it way too much.
I think the thing is, though, we have got to remember, though, I even told myself this when I was writing that note, is it is for kids, and like the jokes that I would find funny are not appropriate for kids, so like, of course it's going to fall flat for me.
Yeah.
Because who at 25 laughs at what do you call a fish with no eyes? Fish. I don't know, what do you call a fish with no arms?
Don't know.
I thought there was going to be a punchline there. No.
Yeah, not fucked over by Chernobyl.
Jesus Christ.
That terrible joke that I just came up with was worth it for Will's reaction alone. The one thing that Andrew said earlier that I wanted to add on to about how they don't overdevelop him or develop him too much to take away some of the fear factor. One thing that I think actually helps keep that creep factor is when when he's having his more touching moments, he's either Spellman or there's that moment where he is the Pied Piper. He only ever looks as Odd Bob when he's actually being creepy.
Yes.
I will.
Does that make sense?
I'm going to say this as well because you mentioned about the Pied Piper. Maybe it's just me, but I didn't really like him being the Pied Piper. I would have preferred if it was just implied that he could be the Pied Piper and left that as a mystery.
If they had a transition once, like towards the end, I could definitely back that. But I just think the performance shifts from Brady Walsh were good enough to actually warrant it.
I like that it's the Pied Piper, just because, kind of like we already said, I like the idea that they've tied it into existing folklore. I think it's really interesting when Doctor Who examines, or the Whoniverse examines, like real-life folklore that exists outside of the Whoniverse.
Yeah. Because as well,
so I liked it personally.
Because as well, I feel like when they reference the Pied Piper and you had that music playing in the background and like them talking about what the Pied Piper did and all that, basically I found that quite creepy. But then when Spellman and Odd Bob transformed into the Pied Piper, I think he lost all threat.
I disagree. I liked that, and I liked that kind of. I know it was like only for like literally 3 seconds, but that moment where he is the Pied Piper and Bradley Walsh is actually kind of like underplaying it there, and he just kind of like almost softly and kind of creepily just says like, "I am the Pied Piper who like stole away a whole town's infants." So I can't remember what the reason was or how he explained
because,
it.
I think
it's because they didn't pay.
I know why they did it. It's just I can't remember how he worded it.
But yeah, I do have some negatives. I don't know how many notes you guys have, but I can roll through my negatives for part 2. Except for a few... ironically, the first note I do have is a positive. Except from a few nitpicks not even worth getting into, I think the first 7 minutes of part 2 are pretty flawless. But I do hate the inspirational bait they do in this episode, as in, ooh, the universe is so amazing with some emotive music. They obviously do it because it's Ronnie's first story, as it's a sort of introduction to the premise of the show, but my god, you have very little to go off to make the whole, aliens and everything, it's all out there line make sense. It just doesn't. So Ronnie saying that makes no sense. It's laughably cliched to the point it's stupid. I really like the pan shot of Sarah Jane as she realises the scheme of the Spellman in the attic. It would have been a flat sequence without that piece of direction. A moment that reminded me of Ryan Sinclair from the main show is when the spell is broken and of the kids using the phones, and you just had an explanation from Luke on what Mr. Smith had done. We cut away to the balloons, and just to reinforce the message, Clyde says, "The phone signals are interfering with the Spellman's power." I understand you have to cut some slack because it's for children, but my golly gosh, that sequence was absolutely dire.
Yeah, I agree there. I do agree, because I hate it. It's one of my main criticisms of the current era of Doctor Who is that they just do that all the time, and it bugs the fuck out of me. But I get what's happening. You don't have to slap me across the face with it.
It's for kids, so it makes sense, but the point you just touched on is in the main show, which is the problem. And I just think it shouldn't remind me of Ryan Sinclair, because Ryan Sinclair shouldn't be written for kids and that bad. But I don't know. Andrew, what were you going to say?
I don't even quite get how that works.
Neither did I, but Andrew explained it to me.
I explained it. Kind of is said in a throwaway line right at the start of part 2. Basically, literally at the start of part 2, when they escape from the building and they're getting into Sarah Jane's car, she explains, I can't remember who asked, but someone asked what happened or like how that worked.
I asked, yeah.
And she explains that his telepathy that he was using to like control the robots, keep the door locked, all that sort of stuff. Basically, how he does what he's going to do, it must like, I don't want to say run because that makes it sound like machinery, but it must like work on a similar frequency to what the mobile phone uses, to the point where it like interferes with it, kind of like a radio signal would.
And it made a point that it pulls Spellman, that's why it kind of does, but then again, when the phone rings later and the telepathy is broken, kind of, he doesn't stop, he's just still talking, and they just picked and choose when to do that.
I do agree that I think I had that note where basically if they were going to have that happen at the start, it should have happened again later just for continuity's sake.
Yeah.
But just the point I'm trying to get at is it is actually explained why that happens.
Yeah.
It is, I will say, and I said this to Will, it's very much a throwaway line that you can miss quite easily.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things that I don't know why I picked up on it, I just did, and I was like, oh, okay, that's why. But it is very much a you can very easily miss it line.
Yeah. And around that scene, I think it was probably rushly filmed. At least that's what I could sense. The whole Luke disappears and then Sarah Jane tries to convince the other two to stay outdoors.
Can we just point out, by the way, with this Luke disappearing thing, the whole of Mirrors looked fucking horrendous.
I disagree.
What the hell was that?
I thought the directing and the editing was exquisite.
I liked the scene. It's just I thought the whatever effects they did looked awful.
The setting was naff, but they directed it good.
I think it worked quite well because it looked weird, but it was meant to look weird.
It was meant to be disorientating, yeah.
Yeah, because it was meant to freak Sarah Jane out.
Yeah,
but because you don't know where Odd Bob is.
I agree with the premise of the scene, and I think in terms of how it affected her character, yes, it works. It's just visually, the way it looks to me was it literally did just look like they had Liz, standing in like a fully blacked out room, just speaking to a camera, or like acting to a camera, and then they just added an effect on the edit so it looked like there were like all these it just looked bad in my opinion. I
respectfully disagree with that. I really like that sequence, and they actually tried to be ambitious kind of with it.
That's fair. I think it looked bad.
And can I just point out as well, like the scene just after Luke gets taken, Sarah Jane goes to go in, and when Clyde says, "I'm going to come in with you," she goes, "No, you stay out here." And I'm like, hang on a minute. You're telling Ronnie and Clyde stay out here because they're apparently going to be safe. Didn't Luke just get taken from outside?
I didn't notice that. That's a good point. Like
that is a fair point.
Luke's just been kidnapped from the outside, and now you're going inside, and you're telling the others to stay outside to where this trap is. Like, yeah, that makes no sense.
It's more noticeable considering that the scenes are right next to each other.
Yeah. And in that scene is a bit of poor acting from Ronnie's actress, in my opinion. Like, she looks down in dismay before Sarah Jane even tells her to stay outside. She was reacting to what she was being told before she was being told it. I felt like that could have done with a reshoot for me. It's such a poor sequence, but again, I do really like the mirror scene, so it's not completely terrible. And then at the end, it's like more Universe's wonderful inspirational bait. It's bad and it's forced. It's trying to make the episode end on a positive note to make people forget about the badness.
All I could think as you started saying that was, it's trying to make fetch happen.
What?
Please tell me you get that reference.
Repeat.
Have you never seen Mean Girls?
No. Sarah Jane Adventures.
Yeah, sorry, that was a massive tangent. I was just completely taken aback by the fact that you have not seen Mean Girls.
No. Unfortunately not.
One other thing I was going to say is I'm going to compare this to the 2017 It, because I've seen that. I like how normal looking Odd Bob is. He looks like a normal clown. But because one of my criticisms of the 2017 It is, I feel like they go too villain clown. And it's like, the point of Pennywise is he's meant to look like a normal clown in order to make people want to come towards him.
I don't know why anyone would want to come towards a clown. They're weird and creepy. Why do people like them?
I think it's because Pennywise goes after kids, and there's like kids are very naive.
Yeah.
Whereas with what's the name? Odd Bob. I like that he looks more normal looking because that's kind of what the intention is.
I don't know about you, but I would never approach him either.
I wouldn't approach him either. Funny thing is, there are people in the real world who would very happily approach Pennywise. Have you not seen the internet? There are a couple of things that I did want to mention very quickly. The first one is, can I just point out, there's a scene in the playground with Ronnie, Clyde, and Luke. This is in part 2. This is like after they escape from Odd Bob. I'm like, why are you discussing your after-school alien fighting activities in a crowded playground?
It's so weird. Like, they have to project their voices, of course, because they're trying to be heard over the screaming kids in the background, but there's still a way to do it.
You're not meant to tell anybody why you're yelling it in a crowded playground.
Are they actually shouting it, though, or...?
I mean, they're not exactly being quiet.
You're
and
not being
there's people
so
right around them.
If they are like that, I think they. On the one hand, they have to be in school, so I think they're just kind of discussing it because they want to discuss it, but they can't leave school. But on the other hand, they could be a bit quieter.
It's more. I understand they have to project for the microphones to pick them up on set, but at the same time, it's kind of like, maybe go to somewhere a bit more private before you start discussing your really inviting after-school extracurriculars.
Sometimes that does happen. I've noticed that in quite a few. I think it's happened in episodes of Doctor Who as well, when they say they're being quiet, but in reality they're shouting it, and you're like, can you be a bit quieter?
Yeah, and I think, Andrew, you mentioned it in a previous episode, like in Smile, I think you alluded to, like in a previous episode. You said, like, Capaldi said, like, they're going to die or they've died. And then just around the corner was one of the family members, and you mentioned how surely that guy would have heard it. Or I think it may have been a Classic Who episode, and it was like, that's just like a TV trope. Like, they're obviously going to hear it, but you just have to interpret that they didn't, because that's how TV works, and it's just a bit stupid.
I know, it was a bit disjointed after all the build-up.
It felt like an odd scene.
I think from the start, obviously, because when Rani first moves in, Sarah Jane is like, we mustn't tell her what we do, no one must ever find out. Yeah. And like, there's all this tension around, obviously we know she's going to find out, but like this whole tension about, trying to keep it a secret, and then they're just in the middle of a playground blaring it loudly for everyone to hear, and I'm like, okay, you do you. That's a smart move. The other two notes I had are, one, this isn't necessarily related to this specific episode. It is, but not, like, it kind of relates to the Series 2 as a whole. Is I really like how a lot of Series 2 builds up to the temptation of Sarah Jane Smith with Sarah Jane's parents. Like, because we have the mention here, as she's discussing, like, living with her aunt and the whole scene with the clown puppet. And we even have that moment of when her and Luke are talking, I think she brings up her parents, and the music from The Temptation of Sarah Jane Smith actually plays over the scene. The music that plays when they sacrifice themselves in the episode, that plays over the scene with Luke. And then obviously in later episodes of Series 2, in particular Mark of the Berserker, we get more mentions of her parents, because it's like all kind of builds up to it. And I just really like that even in a series that's relatively short, like Sarah Jane, because obviously the episodes are only like 20-odd minutes each, I like the fact that they actually go out of their way to like essentially have like a series arc.
I didn't make that connection before, because when I last watched the series, I was about 10. So I'll look out for that, but I definitely do like how they did that.
There's a lot of mentions, and it all builds up to her seeing her parents again in The Temptation of Sarah Jane Smith. Nice. Then the final note I had... Well, oh, sorry, did you want to say something about Andrew?
I've never really noticed that, like that, as you call it, arc. I thought it was just I've noticed the connection with the parents, but I've always thought that was just a mention, and they didn't really notice anything about it, as if they'd never really planned it. But I don't know.
What was that episode where
it definitely planned, because one, they've got the same musical cue, so clearly it was meant to link the two scenes together. And two, because these other mentions all happen within the same series prior to the episode where we meet them, it's clearly all like building up to like, we're going to see Sarah Jane's parents. Then the final note I had was just that I really like the Pharos Institute and how they keep coming back.
Yes.
I like that Sarah Jane basically has her own version of kind of like unit now this time.
Yeah.
Where she just like, and Professor Rivers is always there, and she's a nice character.
I love Rivers.
It's really nice just having a callback character all the time, because obviously we met her in... I think the first time we meet her is The Lost Boy, which is a great episode, by the way.
Yeah, because Nathan Goss.
In that two-part, is that the sequence where she steals from the Pharos Institute and then she's hunted down by bikers?
And she blows them up with the
That
lipstick.
was the scene that stuck out in my head when the Pharos Institute was mentioned. I was like, holy crap, is that scene in this episode? And I was like, surely not. I thought it was in the start of part one.
That's in The Lost Boy.
I love that sequence. I love the Institute. I love Professor Rivers or whatever it is. Great.
It is Professor Rivers. I like the fact that the Pharos Institute is a thing that will keep coming back. Like, we see them again in... I want to say the Eternity Trap. We see them again. I'm sure we see them in Series 4 at some point, and I know we see them in Sky as well.
Yeah.
I don't think they're in Series 4, are they? Because you got...
Oh, maybe not actually. Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah, maybe not. But I do really like the fact that I really like the fact that they keep appearing. Yes. That Sarah Jane has this like recurring, sort of. I don't know. It's just nice, and again, it kind of makes her feel even more like the Doctor. And unrelated to the Pharos thing, just because I think you mentioned it earlier. Like, how does this meteor like somehow trap Spellman back? So it is explained again in the episode, but it's kind of a throwaway. Where basically they established that the reason he came to Earth in that meteor, or it came to Earth in that meteor, and the reason it got out is because it landed in Hamlin, where the townsfolk were like in fear of the plague, and all that fear for the plague was strong enough for it to feed on and come out of the meteor, and that's when it became the Pied Piper, and then it stole the children to have more fear to feed on, and then blah 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 blah, and then at the end when they do the whole laughter thing, apparently that's enough to weaken him enough so that he can't resist the pull of the meteorite anymore. So it's kind of implied that it's kind of implied that the meteor was always trying to trap him. Linked, yeah, it was always trying to trap him back in, but he was strong enough to resist it until they weakened him with the laughter, which is fine. It makes sense. I like it. It's as just throwaway,
innit? It's not obvious.
I like it as a reasoning. It's just it'd work a lot better if it wasn't just Clyde, Ronnie, and Sarah laughing. Like we said earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, it was,
that's my biggest criticism of this whole story is kind of how the resolution is done. Because if it was done a different way, it might have worked more. But as it kind of falls flat.
Yeah.
But overall, I don't think it's a bad episode by any means.
I've got a few things I'm going to say as well that I haven't written them down, but I just kind of thought of them off the top of my head. Firstly, I like the fact that Odd Bob can appear out of nowhere. Because it kind of makes it a bit more creepy. Because
it makes it very sinister, yeah.
Because you don't know when he's going to show up. He could appear from out, and he could literally just appear randomly. It's like that scene. It's like that scene in. I think it's the scene in the Pharos. I can't remember how to pronounce it.
That's like Pharos Institute.
Yeah. When Sarah Jane's getting a bit of the rock from this, and that Professor Rivers shows her, and as she's trying to cut a bit off. All you can hear is, "What are you doing, Miss Smith?"
What are you doing, Miss Smith? I love the delivery.
From out of nowhere, and it just gives you a bit of a jump.
Yeah,
you don't expect it.
Just because you just reminded me one other sort of comedy line. It's not like a ha laugh a minute line, but it is a nice little joke line. Is when she's about to take some of that meteor. And Professor Rivers just turns on and says, "Maybe it's best that I wasn't here," and then leaves so she can basically have plausible deniability of where did this meteor go.
I wasn't involved in this. I wasn't involved.
I liked that. That was a cheeky little line that I really liked.
Don't look at me. It's like when the 10th Doctor, in Day of the Doctor, when the 11th Doctor went wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, and he went, "I've no idea."
No idea what he's talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the continuity in this story, whether it's the just after Maria leaves and it kind of references the past episode, or when Professor Rivers is there because she's also been in another episode, and I think they actually reference the Nathan Goss stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, they do.
The Lost Boy.
Because the reason she agrees to let Sarah Jane take some of the meteor is basically as a thank you for helping us deal with that little shit.
That was a nice little special effect as well when she's Sonic in the
that was quite
impressive.
Well done.
Yeah.
Because she actually catches a physical thing as well, like you can see it. So I was like, oh, that was pretty nicely done. Andrew, do you want to do your conclusion first?
Yeah. Overall, the story is a fantastic story and it's very creepy. And when I'm just watching it, I don't really notice any issues, but reviewing it, I do notice a few more issues, like the change in accent, the plot, the resolution being a bit, not really making sense. The as well as the phone signal thing, but I think that has kind of been explained, but not entirely. Overall, it's a good story with a few issues, but not much that drags down the story too much. Yeah, so not really much to say, to be honest. I think it's a good introduction for Ronnie. It's a good story for Sarah Jane, and it has a really great villain. though, I think, and it's good for Clyde as well. He had some really great moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, Luke kind of gets shoved into the background a bit, though.
Yeah, Luke really doesn't get a lot to do in this.
Yeah. But apart from that, there's not really much else to say. As far as an analytical score goes, I'd probably give it an 8.
Okay.
I think.
Yep, an 8. That's cool. I would chuck that onto the average calculator. Andy, do you want me to go next?
Yeah, sure.
I don't have a conclusion, but I do have 2 scores for both parts, and then I have an average overall score. I gave part 1 an 8 out of 10, and then I gave part 2 a 4 out of 10. So that wraps up to a 6 out of 10 overall. So it's a 6 from me. I do like it, but the flaws just take away the overall experience, especially in part 2. Like the first 7 minutes, as I said, of part 2, fantastic. And then only a few nitpicks in part 2, except from, of course, the whole threat in part 2 and how it's executed and the resolution. It was just all a bit naff, and the inspiration bait, as I mentioned earlier, trying to leave you on a good taste, but it just didn't work for me, and it was too obvious what they were trying to go with. And yes, you gotta give it a bit of slack because it's a children's show, but I think it's unfair of me to just say that and write all the criticisms off as always for children. So yeah, it's a 4 out of 10 for part 2, 6 out of 10 overall for me. That's my conclusion.
Okay. My conclusion, I just put a legitimately creepy story with great performances from all the leads, in particular Elizabeth Sladen and Bradley Walsh, who makes a surprisingly fun and chilling turn as a villain. The It inspiration is blatant, but fun, and it's nice that the universe has tackled another folklore legend from the real world and given it its own sci-fi spin in The Pied Piper. The pacing for me does sag a little during the second part, which is felt given the relatively short runtime of SJA episodes. But every scene does have a purpose, whether it's to build up the plot of this story or to help set up future ones, aka Temptation Sarah Jane Smith. Overall, a thoroughly enjoyable and good Sarah Jane Adventure story, one of the better stories of Series 2. And I gave part 1 8 out of 10 and part 2 6, so overall a 7.
And you landed straight in the middle of the average. Of course, it doesn't take a genius to work that out. The average is a 7 out of 10.
Anyway, this has been episode 8 of the Spin the Wheel Doctor Who podcast. This one lasted longer than expected, but you were saying we wouldn't get an hour out of a Sarah Jane Adventure story. You were wrong, good sir.
Yeah, I'm surprised, yeah.
Thank you very much for watching. This has been very fun. Thank you to our guest, Andrew Hayden.
And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
No worries.
Thank you to my co-host, Will.
No problem. I've hyper dragged you through it and no tangents.
And I have been Andy, your host. And join us next week where I believe...
we need to spin the wheel.
No, we've already done it.
Fuck.
You did it a couple of days ago. We had an argument about this.
And what did it land on?
It was Silver Nemesis, wasn't it?
It was.
Oh,
yes.
God.
So we're doing the Silver Nemesis next week. And I should be doing my first time solo hosting, so that's going to be fun.
You did a good job today, to be fair. What who's in those episodes with you for the audience's benefit?
So for the next 2, because it's the next 2 that I'm solo hosting, isn't it?
Yeah.
George. So George from Pacey Sheet. Isn't Connor coming on as well?
Yes, yeah.
So it's Pacey Sheet and Liam are on next week for Silver Nemesis, and then it's Ed and Xander for episode 10.
Yeah, Ed Waller from the Army of Ghost Doomsday review, and then Xander Grogan from
Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith.
Several. He was also in
he was on Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith with me.
Yeah.
And then I have a couple of weeks off. Yay!
Yeah, until like August 13th, so you got
August 13th, yeah. So, if you liked me and you want to see more of my stuff, you can go over to my personal YouTube where I haven't really uploaded much recently, but I am going to be filming another cover hopefully in the next couple of days, because I do music stuff. Hello, I'm a singer. So you can go check those out. I stream on Twitch over at Kemp Plays, although I haven't done that for a good few weeks now, ever since I broke my nose, because I was, in pain a lot, and then I just got really busy, and I need to set up the new webcam. But that will be coming back soon, hopefully. And If you want to listen to another podcast that I do, my partner Phil and I have a podcast with our upstairs neighbour and close friend Sarah called We Pay For Your Floor, which honestly I still love the name of that. I think it's great. Where it's just us being stupid and doing silly stuff, and it's a lot of fun to make. And as of last night, we are officially now on Spotify as well. So if you want to listen to, if you just want to listen to it, you can go over to Spotify. It is We Pay For Your Floor. And if you want to watch it on YouTube, it is also just We Pay For Your Floor. That is all. Thank you for letting me talk my shit.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yeah.
Go on.
If you like controversial opinions and want to know some of my controversial opinions, then it's all on my Twitter.
Did you give the same score for Love and Monsters that you did the 11th hour? You gave both episodes an 8 out of 10. I'm like, for what the hell? Love and Monsters is not on the same level as the 11th hour.
Aren't you the guy who thinks Listen is shit?
Me? Yeah.
Oh.
I don't think it's shit. I think it starts off okay, but then it kind of I just kind of lose interest in it, and there's a few issues with it, like just personal issues, like Clara just giving that speech to the doctor about
the best scene.
Yeah, I hate it because it feeds into Clara's whole character of being overpowered, which I know her wanting to be like the doctor, which is okay, but then it kind of. It's okay. It's okay in concept, but the execution's poor.
As someone who loves Clara,
and your opinion just gets shafted every single week because we get a new guest and we ask and then everyone hates it.
Everyone fucking hates Clara, and then I'm just sat here by myself, just waving the flag of I love Clara.
Right, I'm gonna hit stop recording. See you guys in a bit. Bye.